Hey everybody, it looks like most everyone found their way back from lunch, so we've got another exciting afternoon of seeing the same charts again. We'll see if Pat has something new or not. This is Pat Guerin of Key Management Solutions. I will say that Pat is the first guy that got me to take this quantum stuff seriously. I thought it was all, well, it is still kind of all crazy stuff in labs.
Bitcoin? What?
He did not steal my Bitcoin. I have no Bitcoin to steal. I wish I wouldn't be here. Anyway, I will hand the mic over to Pat.
Thank you. And before I begin, I want to introduce, over in the gray jacket, there's Ken Teskey. He's of KMS. He's our NSA CSfC requirements guy. We're one of the integrators. That's what his job is. He may chime in during the questions and answers. I probably got about 20, 25 minutes worth of slides. I'm going to save some time for kind of questions and answers. But before I begin, this presentation, it's the update to making sense of the quantum mess. Show of hands, oops, sorry about that. Show of hands, how many people were here last year or saw this presentation last year? Just to get an idea who's new and who saw this last year. So this is kind of new, so good. I can reuse some of the jokes, but let's see. So background, I'm not just going to be, who is this person that's coming up calling this a quantum mess? This is predominantly CSfC based. So another question, how many people are familiar with the concepts of CSfC? Commercial solution, okay, that helps. I was worried this would be all new to you. So when I'm going through this presentation, it's predominantly talking about the quantum mess that's getting better as it relates to CSfC. So as far as my background, why I can, say this mess, it's really, past experience working with this the last, decade or so. But so I was prior military, back in the day I was Army. I used to work comms, used to work with crypto, something you had to do, but you hate it. Got out and I started working, system integration, working advanced concept, JCTDs, all these programs. And I was always the security guy, the one that always had to say, no, you can't do this for accreditation. But crypto was always the pain. Nobody wanted to deal with it. So about 2005, when Suite B came around, it was the original ciphers. I was always a fan of CSfC, the concept. Whereas rather than traditional type 1 and the CCI and all the OPSEC, you could come in and basically develop your own tailored solution and kind of get away with as much of the unnecessary ComSec as possible. So, back in 2008 was the first time we got an ATO for a system, taking it through working all these tactical systems. So we've been working it for a while. And then as far as the quantum resistance side, we're going to be talking today about the use of pre-shared keys as part of how you implement in the interim until the post-quantum, crystals, kyber, dilithium, until they come around. The way to stay quantum resistant right now, the mitigation, is you're going to be implementing pre-shared keys. So kind of a survey here. Pre-shared keys aren't new. Some people are saying, hey, they just came out these requirements document in the last year. It actually came out not only in 2019 was the first time the pre-shared key, the symmetric key management annex came out, but I was going to do show of hands. The first time NSA talked about using pre-shared keys in a CSfC solution, I was going to say, what year do you think? It was actually in 2014. So in the campus wireless LAN capability package, they started saying you could use pre-shared keys instead of certificates. We were working an effort way back then and trying to get the approval for a pre-shared key. How do you validate, verify, entropy, and how do you handle these in the classification? So we were right in the middle of using pre-shared keys for a couple of customers, and that's when everything hit in 2015, where they started saying elliptical curve isn't going to work, we got to rethink the whole thing, and we need to go pre-shared keys. So we were right in the middle of the mix all, kind of back then. So that kind of leads into this presentation is, and I hate to read it word for word, but I'm under this one slide. So really the objective of this presentation is kind of to set the stage here, is in 2015, NSA declassified some of their concerns regarding the threat of quantum computing to classical cryptography, making the, and we'll say, infamous statement, again, 2015, IAD will transition to quantum-resistant algorithms in the not-too-distant future. And this just got everybody kind of in a spin. What do we do now? How do we transition? What are we going to do? And that's the area we've been kind of working since 2015. Whether lucky or unluckily, we were right in the middle of it. So what we're going through in these slides today is, some of it we're going to kind of skim over. It's good. Is what is the real quantum computing, the threat? What is the cause of basically all this quantum resistant CSfC confusion? Good news is we gave this presentation last year, and it was like a week or two later is when NSA updated the symmetric key management capability package, which clarified a lot. We're going to talk about that. when you're looking at the mess, and I hate to say it as a mess, but it's just to catch people's attention that it's going to be hard. But you got to look at this from 4 ways, and I'm going to do kind of a quick. How many people here are kind of the, I'll say, customer or end user, just to get an idea? Is anybody on the end user side? Okay. And then there's trusted integrators. How many integrators? How many people selling the components? Okay. Hate to say selling. And then you're talking about NSA, the product vendors. How many of the vendors are out here? Okay. We're going to be talking about what you should be, how to develop. The trusted integrators, what you should be advising. And then the NSA, CSfC, PMO people. Anybody? Way in the back, always hiding in the back. Oh, and up front, there you go. Always in the back. So we're going to be talking about that. And again, I joke, unsolicited constructive criticism. I'll offer up my 2 cents as the speaker. And we're going to talk about a path forward. So as far as the real quantum threat, we've talked about this, that it's not just everybody, it's really the asymmetric algorithms. The AES is good to go. It's kind of how you get those keys. So anything that's based on asymmetric, you're talking, Diffie-Hellman, it's not quantum resistant. There's a document out there, and I'm not going to get into, the qubits and how, real quick I'll say this, that traditional computers are, working on 1s and 0s. Quantum computers, there's different phases. There's annealing, whatever. But basically, these quantum computers that are coming around are not just faster version of the current computers. It's not like you're going to run Microsoft Office or faster stuff on it. You could use a current traditional computer to do a brute force attack. You're not going to go to a quantum computer and do a faster brute force. It's using different, you've got superposition and the qubits, instead of being 1s and 0s, they could be a 1 or a 0 or a 1 and a 0. So almost imagine that they're going to come up with, question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, on the previous slide, you had IAD. What is IAD?
Information Assurance Directorate, I think is, there we go. It's NSA, sorry. Is that the right hour? Is that what it was? Sorry. Was. So basically, the quantum computers aren't just faster, classical computers. You're going to write algorithms. We talked about Shor's algorithm or whatnot. But basically, imagine this is the easiest way. Rather than trying to crack something, you're not going to do the same thing again and again, brute force. Think of a quantum computer as the ability to basically try every option at the same time and give you the highest probability, best result. So it's really a completely different type of computer, not just a faster computer. So that's one of the takeaways. So really, and we talked about this, that as far as the threat to quantum computer, we talked about you harvest now and you can basically decrypt it later. That is true. That the threat is right now if you're doing CSfC and you're not using anything with pre-shared key. So basically, to become quantum resistant, we can, not to say a bad way, wait around until 2020, someday when you got your post-quantum algorithms. Or you can employ there's a couple of options for your pre-shared key. You're going to start hearing 87, 84 compliant IKE v2. But if you use pre-shared key, you could be quantum resistant right now, and that's the mitigation. That's what we're going to be talking about. For the 2023, I put a question mark. I was going to have the little, what was that chart? The timeline, but there was an over-under kind of, I'm going under, so I took it out, so. So the details, this is also hard, and I'm going to talk, unlike traditional CSfC where you have certificates, these are some of the things, the certificates are handled or they're CUI, so they mutually authenticate and you derive basically the keying material. With pre-shared key, you're going to be generating these pre-shared keys, I hate to say on the high side. These are going to be classified keys. When they get spit out, they're going to be called crypto. They're going to be labeled and handled. So there's a lot of considerations we're going to be going over, but the details of 2 things. So one is that when somebody says, when is a cryptographically relevant quantum computer going to come around? You can go to some of the other networks and find out. I mean, it's still, not going to go, but a lot of the details are going to be classified. So really, it's not just the exposure. So a lot of people say it's we're going to harvest and decrypt it later. There are some other considerations, and I haven't seen this retracted yet, but a while ago, NIST made a statement that there's a 1 in 7 chance by 2026 that some aspect of PKI will be broken, and basically 50-50 by 31. So it's not just you're worried about somebody storing, basically harvesting and storing it later. Now, this is unclassified, but the key takeaway for all this is it's not this futuristic, we're only worrying about the harvest and store. There's just problems with pre-shared, with CSfC right now that there are mitigations for. So the way to mitigate it NSA, the CSfC PMO, will release documentation. And like I said, you're going to be using pre-shared keys where they're classified or handle as classified. And I'd say I do this because there's a lot of confusion is what does handle as classified mean, or, protected as classified. But essentially you're going to create these pre-shared keys, and the vendor's products, whether it's using MACsec or IPsec, they're going to implement the new version. There was an IKE v1, and then it went to IKE v2. The next flavor up that's quantum resistant is called RFC 8784 compliant IKE v2, and that does certificate and pre-shared key mixing. So that's a phrase, if you're doing CSfC, you're going to get to know or at least look for. You can also work the pre-shared keys, pre-placed keys, whatever you want to call them, for MACsec. So according to NSA, the pre-shared keys, they must be provided by an NSA-approved key generation solution. Sorry for the air quotes. And as far as the process, back in 2015, chicken and the egg, there really wasn't an approval process. So when we were working again back in 15, 16, 17, we were kind of working with them, going back and forth, helping to figure out what are the requirements, not just technical, the operational. This policy says this procedure. So in addition to the other requirements, you have to satisfy some other NSA CSfC requirements. There is a document, it's the Symmetric Key Management Requirements Annex, which is different than the traditional Key Management Requirements Annex. There's other capability packages. They're starting to crosswalk these now where you're going to see pre-shared key references in there. And then there's other, I hate to say classified and derived requirements, because a lot of the CSfC tailoring is based on your operational controls. So you really can't just have an unclassified set of requirements that match everything. You basically have to crosswalk and see what requirements apply to you. Within the CSfC documentation, they do reference CNSS Pub, Committee for National Systems Security. And you got the policies, directives, instructions. Now, those are the highest level documents, and then each department or agency, the Department of Defense, Department of Interior, Department of State, or NSA or the other three-letter agencies, they'll start to develop their policies and procedure. These are kind of the higher level common ground. And there is some ambiguity or wording that's different when you start talking different services. So we recommend kind of go back to the root and see what that, before it got translated into your local department or agency speak, kind of if there's a question, you can walk that back. So we're going to be going again over the unclassified requirements, but a lot of this again is based on your ConOps. The other thing is normally the integrators, there's a lot of latitude, they can make recommendations. NSA specifically saying that some determinations need to be made, and these are going to be more on the AO side. They're going to have to make some decisions here and get more involved. So really the root cause of a lot of, what is the CSfC confusion or the quantum resistant, if you look at the whole body of knowledge for not just CSfC, but the quantum resistant, there's top right what you know. You know that CSfC is 2 tunnels, you got certs, and you could do up to C, you know what you know. You may know what you don't know. So I know we got to do something with pre-shared key, and I know we got to do some CNS, but when you start getting into what you don't know, there's higher level authorities, but a lot of the things, it's like when I grew up learning how to ski and learn to snowboard, I had to unlearn skiing to learn snowboarding. A lot of the commercial stuff, this is where it gets into the you don't know. CSfC is everybody wants to have the commercial in CSfC. And it's like, well, you're talking for NSS, National Security Systems. There is going to be more classified stuff to think about. All the cookbooks and everything are not just on the unclass side. There is documents out there. There's a quantum-related security classification guides. Again, you're generating these pre-shared keys that are no longer CUI certs. They're going to come out and they're going to be called crypto. So when we do CSfC in the old days, we used to be able to talk to the type 1 and EKMS people and say, hey, good news. I know you hate CSfC. You think it's going to steal your job. If you have one piece of CCI, you've got job security. CSfC's taken away all the high risk, and they were like, oh, we love this. But now it's like, well, remember these pre-shared keys? Well, now we're going to have to start tying it into how you do your tracking, and it's kind of CSfC or it's kind of type 1, and so there's going to be some educating going on with the type 1 people. And a lot of the discussions and how you develop this solution is definitely not going to be at the unclassified level. And again, because a lot of it's based on your ConOps. Let's see, the other problem is when you talk to people, if you're talking in an unclassified environment, most likely you're going to get an unclassified answer and not even a hint of, you may want to look at other resources and drill down. So just again, there's more to, CSfC, I guess it's getting less commercial and more, I guess, specialized into whatever your solution is. Don't yell at me. I've told people this, NSA CSfC requirements are intentionally vague and open to interpretation. And I jokingly say they're horribly written, but you're not going to absolutely write something. The idea behind type 1, the complaint against type 1 and all your OPSEC was it was very black and white and it inhibited, your operations. The idea behind CSfC was the tailoring, and you get to develop tailored solutions for this. So NSA, when we've talked about what does this word mean, they didn't say whatever you want. But as long as you looked and came collectively with, your technical, your operational, your policy, you had a little bit of wiggle room, but they looked at the whole system. So they're not horribly written, they're just intentionally vague. And what we're gonna have to do is it's gonna require the AO to make some determinations to do the tailoring. Now the problem, and this is back to the mess, is this either presupposes or assumes that the AOs either understand what the implications are of them making some determinations or decisions. Or I'll say if they're trusting integrators who are making these decisions for them, that may not always be the best case. There's also ambiguity. So although CSfC, they try to keep things intentionally vague, there are words that are even more inherently ambiguous. And you have to talk to the customer and explain what these words mean because words matter. So again, the security classification guide points out some things. But there are these concepts of like closed gray networks or handle as classified. There are integrators we've talked to and I've been in meetings and they're like, it means this. And it's like, I hate to just correct you, but no, or at least be open to it could mean this. But there are some concepts that before, when we were doing certificate-based CSfC, maybe you could get away with like a looser interpretation and I didn't want to split hairs with them. But now that you're introducing pre-shared keys and you're getting into these are classified, you got to have another set of requirements are going to come in. They're going to force you to rethink some of the ways you interpreted words because you're absolutely conflicting with some of the policies and procedures that maybe you didn't notice before you were conflicting with it. The other thing we always say, as far as the customer, CSfC is always a work in progress, and that's not really a bad thing. Yes, sir.
So one thing I'm trying to wrap my head around, you're saying you're going to need pre-shared keys, and one of the issues with those is distribution, right?
Totally.
And we can't distribute them anymore with the asymmetric algorithms. So what you're saying is we're going to treat them as cryptographically controlled items, and procedurally, it's going to be a nightmare for folks procedurally, but this is how they're going to have to.
I'd say I'm coming back with it depends, which I hate saying. There's wiggle room that it doesn't have to be. And actually, I got a slide later where we talk about this, where it really is, if you can hold off, and if I don't answer it in a couple of slides, you can throw something at me, I promise, but I'll hit that. Great question, though. The other thing is and this is one of the determinations, like how exactly are we handling it? We talk about this, there's documents that are referenced, the CNSS 4005, it's Safeguarding ComSec Materials. And basically I'm not going to jump to it. There's another slide. But basically, there's a lot of determinations that the AO needs to make. You can make the recommendations to them. But when you make these determinations, you may seem like there's a lot of options, but by making certain decisions, it's going to limit your options, which sometimes is great because you've got paralysis by analysis. You got too many options. Other times, you're holding off. So It really is, if you delay forever to make certain determinations, you're just going to be going in circles. So as a customer, these are some of the things to think about. That's the high level, the what you know. So back to what a customer should consider. And again, this is one this comes up all the time. The first thing you got to understand is CSfC is not a cheaper version of Type 1. I hear it all the time, and I say it's going to be more expensive. And how many people have either heard or said CSfC is a cheaper version of Type 1? Okay. And then it's like, nah. And I cut and pasted a bullet, but the second bullet is I would reconsider. If you can go Type 1 for certain things, I would go Type 1. We tell them, if you can go Type 1, don't go CSfC. Because CSfC is hard. Yes?
So isn't the current NSA guidance to evaluate CSfC first?
Actually, if you're saying, I'll let you go first. Or I can,
We're actually NIAP, so not specific, can't answer the specific guidance for CSfC, so I'll throw that back to the CSfC people in the back.
I can throw out my first answer unless you want to. Question was, aren't you, Dominic asked, aren't you supposed to evaluate CSfC first?
So in the old IAB policy, it did say that, and that policy is under revision currently. We're told to say that whatever's the best option or the right option, there's too many suggestions from that. It's very.
Okay. So, and I'll talk to you after. There's CNSSP document, it's Appendix D. It's, for certain high-risk areas, you're supposed to look at alternatives to type 1, and you could do CNSA, and there's different options, but yeah, it's not like you have to. So anyway, really, this is again for the customer is, if you thought CSfC was hard, quantum resistant is going to be harder because we're adding this other layer of this pre-shared key mixing. And if you think you're just going to outsource it to integrators, you can, but then they're going to just develop something that cheapest cost and throw all the operations on you. So really developing this required quantum resistant, the pre-shared key generation is going to require more involvement. These were some of the AOs. Now this is one of the greatest things since last year. I think it was a week after this conference. So they're in the key management, not symmetric key management, but in the key management annex, it's KM25. They updated it to say the AO and information owner must determine whether classified information, and it's needing protection of 20 years or longer, exists on the network being accessed and or is being processed. So before they made this clarification, and this was, the first documents came out 2019, the first symmetric, and it was very vague as who made the decision and what is this type of data, and we don't think it's that, so we're just not going to look at the requirements. Plus, it was in the symmetric, not in the key management, but the symmetric. So if anybody does CSfC and you're doing campus wireless LAN and if you're doing multi-site and mobile access capability package, you're not going to read the wireless LAN, campus wireless LAN capability package. Until they did this, they put this requirement in the key management. Nobody would read the symmetric key management requirements because they assumed it didn't apply and they just got to pretend it wasn't there. So this clarified it, not only that they said who makes it, it's not the integrator, it's the AO and the IO. So now you're looking at the data. And essentially 20 years or longer, if you're plugging or touching SIPRnet, that's 20 years or longer. Somebody can say I'm wrong, but that's. The other thing is exists on the network being accessed or is being transmitted. So when everybody was saying, well, we're going to block a port on the CSfC solution and not pass that long life data, that goes out. They clarified a bunch of that. So if you're CSfC and you're plugged into SIPR, you need to go pre-shared key like yesterday. And again, you can do deviations and it's going to take time, but that's one of the things. There's my typo. It was the AO approved procedures are needed to basically transfer the pre-shared keys from the red network to this gray network in the CSfC components. So CSfC right now, you've got this closed gray, the closed network. And a lot of times what people will do will aggregate the data, monitoring data with SIMs or basically one-way taps and push it up. Now you're generating these pre-shared keys and you're going to be downgrading them. So just assuming we're just going to air gap it and walk it down, or you got higher networks, I'll just plug in a USB stick and carry it around. It's not smart to make the assumption that that's going to be easy, and you're going to have AOs involved in anything with a cross-domain solution, walking stuff up and down. Who owns the data? You're generating the pre-shared keys.
Question.
Yes.
In that first bullet, does it just pertain to the timeline for protection, or is it the type of classification of the network as well?
For this one, say that again, I'm sorry.
So you have needed protection for 20 years or more.
Right.
Is that the only trigger, or is it the type of network it is, like TSSCI, something like that?
Well, if it's anything that requires, and they had the phrase, it was like long life intelligence, there's different terms, but the footnote, that's where I cut and pasted. If you need to protect the information, the data, if any of the data needs protection of 20 years or more, then it's required. So if you're plugging into SIPRnet, if there's one document on SIPRnet that's marked, the releasability is, more than 20 years, it's 20 years. So if you're on SCI, it's definitely, TS, you're definitely 20 years or longer. Oh, sorry. This was the other one, is that this, and this is good. So the CNSS 4005, previously it said you need to strictly adhere to the requirements of the CNSS 4005, and strictly the ComSec guys were freaking out. But you're not. I can't put you in our, our auditing system, our management system. It was kind of messy. So then it was changed where it says you should use these as a guidance. So you're supposed to use the CNSS, those documents and the derived as a guidance. That's great because you have the latitude, but you're going to be explaining to most likely, not the AO, they're going to go to your EKMS, your type 1 people, what's the best way, what does this mean? And they're going to be twitchy, so there's going to be some education experience. Otherwise, if they play hardball and say, I want this to be an ALC, an accounting legend code 1, I want to handle everything as type 1, you're basically back to type 1 OPSEC with commercial hardware, and you can't even do that because you can't put commercial hardware in all your EKMS, all your CMCS, all your monitoring system. So when you're talking about your pre-shared key generation solution, there's going to be a lot of questions up front. The more you can figure out how to reuse existing policies and procedures and take advantage of where your type 1 handling is hard, that's where you take advantage of what CSfC offers. Otherwise, if you just go there and say, we're going to handle this type 1, go back to type 1. So this is another one that I strongly believe in this, if you read the documentation, is the generating the pre-shared keys, I would say, starting point is an inherently government position. You're generating ComSec. It's going to come out and it's going to be labeled crypto. So now you could say, hey, have a contractor do it, but then I don't know who's the AO or the authorized, representative. According to the CNSS pubs, they're going to have to go through, they're going to have to be ComSec custodians. We're going to be talking about the ComSec couriers moving stuff. But these are going to be classified keys unless somebody wants to change the rules and do whatever they want. That's the starting point. But there's not a lot of work in it. So let's just say, everybody always talks about pre-shared keys don't scale. If you're doing like a multi-site connectivity, and let's just say you got 8 remote sites, you're changing pre-shared keys every 180 days. Somebody pushes the button to create the keys, the key generator. You're generating 8 keys and transferring them. That's once every 180 days. It takes somebody a second. That's where I would say, have the government person push the button. There's a question of basically how you're moving the keys back and forth we're going to talk about. But the starting point is you're going to have more government people involved, I would say, as the starting point. Unless they are very clear on if they're going to have the contractors do it, you got to put stuff in there, DD-254s, and there's a lot of contract stuff to make them accountable or able to do it. All right, so last thing is the writing the RFPs. There's a big joke is, what do you call the person that graduated last from medical school? You call them a doctor. What do you call a CSfC solution with like 60 deviations? It's a CSfC solution. So I always hear people that say, we hired a consultant or an integrator to develop a solution, and you can make a lot more money if you just basically throw all the deviations and the risks on the customer, which I don't think is good. This is one that for the key generation, you got to work more with what does the customer have and what can they reuse and it makes sense, and how do you make the changes. So what should the integrators be advising? I'm going to go through these kind of fast. It assumes they understand and they're tracking a lot of this. But really, it's going to be doing a lot more analysis up front, figuring out, explaining to them what the keywords, working with the AOs. I misspelled it, not misspelled it, but, now that you're talking pre-shared key pair, how you're doing like your disaster recovery, your high availability, high level, different people use different acronyms, and what exactly do you mean by COOP or fault tolerant, fault resistant? This stuff has to be talked about up front. The vendors should also know, or the integrator should also know what the differences are between the vendor's product. The IKE, the 8784 compliant IKE V2, who does what, when, and how. I've talked to some vendors and they're like, never even heard of it, and that's not a good sign because they got to go through FIPS and common criteria. Other vendors, you got this pre-shared key, you got to load it on, let's just say, a controller. Are you going to stick it in the controller and from a command line ingest it? Are you going to put it somehow in the management workstation and push it? Every vendor does it a little bit different, but that's going to affect your ConOps. There's kind of vague guidance as to how you move these pre-shared keys around. We also talked, if you've heard RACI, I always screw it up. What is it? Responsible, accountable, collaborated, informed. But it's the separation way up front. What you're going to want to start thinking is all the separation of duties. Not only just to go through the separation, you don't have a need to know an insider threat, but there's going to be a lot of information overload talking about this pre-shared key that people don't need to know about. You're just keeping their eyes on the prize. And And kind of back to the KGS, you either do it or you don't. This is back to upfront. Where is that line in the passing of the baton, the pre-shared key? Because if you're kind of having people go back and forth, you gotta, it's gotta be in the contracts, the authorities, the accountabilities, who's gonna be doing what. These are some other basic expectations, for the integrator. Basically, you gotta talk about things are gonna be changing and pre-shared key, some are more, keying a site-to-site for the first key is going to be harder than a mobile access where you get to provision things locally. Campus wireless LAN, you're walking around, but there's a lot of key, rekey, storing that are going to be not only network classification specific, but also capability package specific. So what do the vendors do? For the vendors, I'd recommend if you've got 8784 compliant, I'd say have it on a slick and say right now exactly what the dates are. It's coming soon is not an answer. But a lot of the requirements, we've been talking, I think, most of the vendors, but in the capability, in the symmetric key management requirements annex, it says, if you have a product that's going to be on the inner tunnel, or outer tunnel, so mobile access, if you've only got one inner tunnel, pre-shared key on the inner. If you're going to have two inner tunnels for mobile access, you put pre-shared key on the outer, that's the starting. Campus wireless LAN, it's always on the inner. These slides are going to be available, we talked about this pretty sure, so you don't have to copy it. And then for multi-site, the goal is both inner and outer, and so as far as the vendors, this is the big thing is you got to think pre-shared key. This isn't CUI, but how are you ingesting it and handling your access control storage? Can people see it? How are you obfuscating it, doing destruction? How are you ingesting it? Like I said, how are you doing the over-the-air rekey? Big difference between, how are you going to do auditing of a campus wire or mobile access where do you need eyes-on inspection on a pre-shared key if the user doesn't have access to it? So there's a lot of things that are like, never thought about the auditing and the care and feeding because we didn't have to do a lot of that stuff with these certificates. And a lot of this also depends on the AO's determination on how much auditing, how much granularity you're going to do. The required capabilities, they're going to be evolving based on customer requirements, and that's just been the way it has been, and it'll keep going. NSA, CSfC PMO. So they gave the community just horribly written, I'm joking obviously, the requirements. The change from last year, like right after when they clarified it was great. I really like the latitude in the requirements. I joke about it, but it really assumes that you're going to sit down and do what's best for the customer and explain, here's what these words mean, here are the impacts of these decisions. So I said the 523, so that was when May of 23 is when the newest version of the symmetric key management came out. There is a document too, people always talk about the capability packages. There's a tactical capability package coming out and all the new ones. There's a process on the NSA website. On the website, under the annexes where you release them, there's a link and it talks about the process. There's a 6-step process where NSA calls for information and basically, so in steps 1 and 2, they're looking for validated requirements where people can affect and say, I have requirements, I need this. And so when NSA is saying, hey, we always want to hear from you, with all due respect, they don't have a lot of time to hear good idea fairy stuff. I mean, they're curious and they'll talk to you. But if you've got validated requirements, look at this, you'll have the link, look it up. They want to engage with you and have you affect the capability packages. There is also documentation. It's the key generation solution. There's approval criteria and approval checklists. The technology is kind of hard because there's a lot of requirements, but it's not the hardest. The policies and procedures and, like we said, walking around the pre-shared keys is where it starts getting really messy. Tying it to your risk management framework and your accreditation is where you're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, because things are getting real. NSA participates in events like this. Last slides here is, what else can NSA do? I jokingly say this is, I'd like to see them pull out all the cost savings refs. I know that in the trifold, I think it references, there's a Southcom and a Secure View. Hey, they saved a bunch of money, and it's like, that was like 6 years ago, and maybe look at the total cost of ownership and see if that's still real. But every time I meet with a customer and they're like, we want to save money, it's like, you should use CSfC where you can't use type 1, and then that's where it makes sense. I'd like to see on the NSA website where they have the components list, maybe put a star or something for vendors who are RFC 8784 compliant already. and I know it's changing, so for instance, not to bash Cisco if you're here, Cisco is on the vendor diversity list and then they fell off, and some of it gets into every time you put a product through. I don't know if it's because the way they implemented the same code for 8784 compliant, or they're just in a different, don't know. But the website is where everybody goes, the TIs, to look for stuff, so I would say, put a big blinky, you know, a lot of vendors some have said, we haven't even started 8784. Well, you need to tell your customers that because you're asking them to do a 2-3 year deviation. But I'd reward any vendor that has it right now, let them go to the top of the list would be my 2 cents. And then more proactively, these are the last thing, it's really clarify some of the ambiguous terms. We always get into this gray thing. So CNSSP defines CNSSP 7 defines, it's NSA, it's CSfC gray as singly encrypted, and there's a definition for it. The enterprise gray, there isn't a term for it, but there's an annex for it. But whenever you talk to somebody on the DISA side, or they talk about DISA, global gray, it's CSfC. It's like you're kind of using words that are not interchangeable. DISA's, I'm not even going there. So whenever we sit down and people say words like that or handle as, okay, whoa, what do you mean and what is your higher level authority? We always start with, what do you think you know, back to what you know, and what you don't know, you don't know. It's back to the words matter. So the path forward, reconsider type 1. If you can do it, do it. And if you can't do, and you're doing CSfC and you can't go back, you need to dive into pre-shared key because you're already a couple of years behind, depending on when you read it. I'd start to come up with a development plan, and you don't have to finish it, but just whatever your organization has for an implementation plan, start picking vendors, teams, separation of duties, all that kind of stuff. IMKM plan, figuring out, need to know, these are the last slide. And really start digging into those requirements and derived requirements in the CNSSP. And you're gonna have to start thinking again how you're doing the cross-domain solution, because now you're actually pushing data down or moving stuff down, not up. And how you're handling ComSec right now is the starting point. And then, work with your vendors, make sure they, what are their timelines and are they sticking to them, and track changing requirements. And then start engagement with your AO and your ComSec people and start the discussion. Where are they? You may have to crawl, walk, run, do an IETO and kind of evolve those policies and procedures as you go. And then, if you're anybody, again, read that process. People complain about the capability package, but there is a process where you can formally provide comments to NSA, do it. And that is it. I already answered my questions.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
About to get the hook out for you, Pat. All right, up next we have Daniel Apon from MITRE, their applied cryptography lead. Daniel is also an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, College Park. He's going to talk to us about applying quantum or post-quantum cryptography. So lots of process talk already today, and now we'll talk a little bit about applications. Look at that. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So Daniel Apon, I actually previously was on the NIST PQC team. Where's Dustin? He's somewhere in here. Maybe he left it. So Dustin was on his team for about 4 or 5 years or so. And kind of when these algorithms were selected, moved over to MITRE, really working on various migration issues. So for this particular talk, this is actually going to be more on the commercial side of things rather than the commercial solutions for classified. But I wanted to actually, I guess, give this talk, to make sure that people are sort of aware of this. So this is sort of the motivator for the talk. MITRE, along with company Sandbox AQ, organized this workshop, first annual real world PQC. We held it in Tokyo about a month and a half ago. It was co-located with an IOCR conference, Real World Crypto, and also it was adjacent to IETF 116 in Yokohama. And so there are a whole collection of different things that are sort of the first, I say, half year or so in the kind of the public space that happened immediately after NIST's selections for the algorithms, so Kyber, dilithium, et cetera. And so I just wanted to kind of survey some of this, and here's sort of the gist of what I'm going to talk about today. And again, this is really in the commercial side of things, I should say, kind of the industrial side. In particular, really in the international space where people are coming at things from a variety of different angles. And so I sort of want to just talk about that and maybe mention a couple specific things that, specific topics that came up when we're kind of, major topics in Tokyo, and just talk about some kind of things that the open community might be working towards actively on right now, including places like IETF and so forth. So this is, I'll just totally skip this. We've had this exact same thing at the intro to every talk today, probably. And so I'll just say, I guess last July, NIST announced the 4 algorithms that it selected. Then there's CSfC 2.0 into September, and the White House memorandum, among various other various memorandums and such that came out, was in November. I'm not sure. We'll say this is the first PQ encrypted diplomatic cable, but it was one that Macron tweeted about, and so that we'll just call that the first publicized one or something. And finally, there's we're hopefully going to have in another maybe half year, these kind of FIPS standards for the NIST algorithms. So that's sort of the state of things overall. So we're going to kind of term this the PQ messy phase in terms of the commercial sector and industry. And there's a number of different things that are going on. So there's sort of this fragmenting of the community, I would say, in the public sector, right? So you have IETF, for instance, that's working on things there. You've got ITU-T, for instance, that is working on maybe X509 certificates along with IETF. NIST is, for instance, maybe looking at PIV credential cards. There's like Wi-Fi Alliance and IEEE are working on different things as well. ETSI, I think, is focused on telecoms. And while all these things sort of overlap in terms of their interest in the NIST process, they are sort of now working on different applications of these, applying these algorithms in the real world, in some sense separately. There's also differing regulatory approaches. You understand that? So anyway, different regulatory approaches out there. In particular, the different governments that are, have influence in this kind of public sector are taking different approaches. So obviously, NSA is discouraging hybrid approaches in general. There's, I would say, sort of no decision on hybrids in the UK and Canada, at least officially. They're still thinking about it. We have ETSI in the EU that's sort of broadly allowed for hybrids. Hybrids meaning solutions where you have still, say like a traditional key exchange like an Blue Curve one in parallel with your, say, Kyber or other post-quantum solution. But in particular, Germany and France, through BSI and ANSI, are legally requiring solutions to be hybrid. And to not allow just pure PQC solutions, at least wherever they have influence. And that is kind of complicating the different, options as people are moving forward with kind of the migration to post-quantum crypto. In particular, all these systems in principle are supposed to communicate with each other, and this is going to lead to this very complicated, heterogeneous environment for at least the next handful of years. Returning to this later. In addition to, multiple regulatory approaches and so forth, different working groups, there's all these multiple consortiums, working groups, migration projects. This seemed to be sort of the state where, so we have the classic XKCD comic, there's 14 competing standards. This is ridiculous. We should have just one standard that, solves everyone's problems. And, so start working on this and suddenly have 15 standards now that are all competing with each other. There is sort of that kind of situation, that kind of feeling where a bunch of people are kind of simultaneously, beginning work. Everyone's been waiting. Now you're really starting this kind of work moving forward. So just to name a couple of them that came to mind. Obviously, there's NIST's and CCUE's migration to PQC project that Bill gave a great overview of earlier today. That's, I think, really, in particular, one of the first movers in the overall space for kind of bringing people together for migration. One that was announced recently, I guess in Las Vegas a handful of months ago, is this post-quantum telco network task force. It's really kind of this European consortium between IBM, GSMA, and Vodafone. There's also, of course, IETF's new PQUIP working group. I think Bill also mentioned they're sort of coordinating all things IETF. All things PQC at the IETF. And actually, it's worth pointing out for this workshop that we had in Tokyo, the real-world post-quantum cryptography. So one of the organizing committee members was the chair of PQUIP. So this is sort of about once a year there will be this kind of IETF week with a lot of PQC stuff happening. There'll be real-world crypto and also real-world post-quantum crypto. Sort of, we're trying to align these annually going forward to kind of have a lot of different ways to kind of coordinate things. But some other ones that I mentioned that are just sort of booting up have not yet yet started. So for instance, the Linux Foundation I know is putting together a consortium to build open source PQC implementations, and have trying to enlist a lot of people in that. And also, I should speak for my own company. MITRE in about a month is going to sort of stand up a coalition for accelerating PQC adoption. And so those are not yet fully formed, and so I won't talk too much about them other than to say that there are lots of different consortiums and coalitions coming online. What you want to make sure, of course, in this space is that you sort of deconflict different efforts, but there's a great opportunity to really get a lot done very quickly. And so there's, hopefully all these organizations and working groups will sort of collaborate. But really the challenges in this space is that, there's really no one-size-fits-all solution. This is kind of a slide actually drawn from Douglas Stebela's talk at RWPQC. He actually will be the chair for RWC next year, as well as the chair for crypto. So he's been focusing a lot on this area about migration. And this is sort of the picture that people are dealing with, is that, depending on your use case, lattice-based cryptography, I think broadly speaking, there's at least some good confidence in its quantum resistance. It's extremely fast and relatively small. Hash-based signatures, well, it's based on hash functions. Everyone definitely trusts hash functions, in terms of their security, and, they're just kind of the most basic thing that you would trust in crypto. Unfortunately, they're extremely large and slow comparatively, and so finding places where you can really use hash-based signatures, in particular like Sphinx Plus, is difficult. I think, in fact, Sphinx Plus, I believe, is not part of CNSA, so 2.0. So this is sort of the situation there that people are dealing with in the public community. And in terms of just PQ messiness overall, kind of moving forward, the NIST PQC fourth round is still ongoing. It's examining at least 3 schemes, Class and Cleese, HQC, and BIKE, for kind of future public standardization. And there's this on-ramp call that's coming out. I think Dustin should have mentioned this earlier today at the start of the thing. So anyway, submissions are due June 1st, and there will be even additional signatures eventually coming out there. And getting all of the various people in the public sector on board is just going to be just a giant challenge to get them all kind of coordinated. So that's really the overall picture of just the theme, the feeling of sort of being at these public events in Tokyo. I think, in fact, the next one probably will be in Toronto early next spring, where there'll be IETF actually in Asia, and then I think real world crypto and real world post-quantum crypto will be in Toronto shortly after that. So that things will progress, but in the meanwhile, I wanted to sort of mention at least 2 technical things that came up that are at least worth understanding, that this is part of the overall picture. So in particular, this notion of hybrid versus composite is sort of a major challenge. It's certainly really been raised significantly in the IETF. Right, so if you're going to hybridize between, kind of like I say, legacy cryptography and your new quantum resistant or quantum safe cryptography, you can hybridize either as a composite or non-composite scheme. I guess to make the distinction simple, non-composite means that the protocols are changed and kind of will call, for instance, it'll call your classical crypto, it'll call your post-quantum crypto, and the protocol will be modified. In composite, the protocols themselves will not change, but instead the libraries will sort of form an amalgamation between multiple different types of algorithms. So you might have a cryptographic library that itself calls some version of elliptic curves, maybe calls some lattice algorithm, and so forth. And it turns out that this simple distinction leads to what I'll gently call a debate in the IETF. So there's this composite versus non-composite debate. I've heard independent people refer to it as a holy war multiple times, but this is sort of an ongoing thing, in particular in the LAMPS working group. And also, sort of getting uptake into PQUIP as well, and sort of the discussions there. So among the different ways you could hybridize, the way in which you hybridize becomes particularly challenging in terms of certificate change, in particular with X509 certificates, for instance. So you can imagine basically 2 simple ways you might hybridize, certificate schemes like X509. With a composite certificate, you can imagine it's just a chain of signatures, but you have, 2 types of signatures. You got your traditional, you got your post-quantum. So at every step of the chain, do you have the classical sign both the classical and post-quantum from the prior step, and the post-quantum sign both the classical and post-quantum from the prior step? That would be composite, where they're sort of bound together at every step along the chain. On the other hand, you have non-composite certificates. And non-composite certificates are relatively simple to describe. I have my classical certificate chain, and I have my post-quantum certificate chain, and you just verify both independently, and they don't cryptographically merge together at any step along the way. And there's various ways you can talk about or composition or and composition of, hey, if I have two independent chains, do I verify at least one of, do I verify both to kind of, basically verify my certificate at the end of the day. This has, been probably one of the biggest points of contention I've seen in the public space, and how this plays out is well, it's uncertain right now. It's uncertain how it's going to play out, and in particular with certificates and internet root of trust. Oftentimes these things are internationally sort of controlled and so forth. So it's hard to say because people are disagreeing internationally about this. The pros and cons about these types of different types of certificates. If the long-term goal is to achieve sort of a pure PQC deployment, we do all this work, we finally get to a point where we're happy, we have post-quantum cryptography, and it's done exactly as we wanted. We hopefully will have this under, for instance, NIST algorithm selections, for instance, with CSfC, maybe other PQ algorithms in different settings, maybe future NIST algorithms, et cetera. But fundamentally, we're aiming for pure PQC deployment. There's sort of this risk of composite certificates in the sense that certificates are long-lived cryptographic objects that stay around for long times, decades or further. And if you sort of have bound together these, classical and post-quantum, signatures into a single chain, well, it's now hard to get rid of your classical cryptography for much longer than the planned migration. The value perhaps of a composite certificate might be that, there's no issue of sort of a downgrade attack where someone, basically forces an adversary to, or the adversary forces some user to only verify the chain that they can break, whether the adversary has a quantum computer or whether they perhaps have a, really fast classical attack on the new post-quantum algorithms. So they would sort of force the honest users into using one or the other. So that's the value of composite. It makes it sort of hard to do that. But sort of there's this opportunity with non-composite of, well, hey, you can have two independent chains. When you're done with the classical, just stop verifying it. Just say, hey, I'm done, throw it away. And that particular trade-off there is, like I said, it's sort of an ongoing holy war in the IETF. The next thing I want to mention briefly was just kind of some implementation issues. Just highlight these. These I thought were two of the interesting public research results that seem most relevant to the current migration. And so the two of these here are both implementation issues related to side channel resistance, hopefully in the CSfC space, which I am new to the kind of the ecosystem here. This is sort of handled, but I want to mention these are things that people are actively working on in public and we're putting lots of sort of energy and effort into, and you should see, future research and commercial products kind of taking advantage of this thought and this kind of, scientific research. So the first is there's this sort of infamous paper, where AI quote unquote broke Kyber, and it got a lot of press. And anyone who's like a cryptographer kind of rolls their eyes and says, yeah, sure, AI broke Kyber. What it was an artificial intelligence sort of templating step into a power analysis attack side channel on Kyber. The interesting thing here, from my perspective, was not exactly the fact that it was an artificial intelligence templating step, but rather that it actually broke a reasonable fifth order masking attempt. So the point is, once you get about fifth order masking, it's already made the scheme so expensive that you don't really want to increase the order of masking even further as a potential countermeasure. So this is something that I think people are going to be concerned about. Some different, let's say, jurisdictions pay more attention to whether you can have a particular, like a kind of a publicly available side channel resistant implementation of some of the post-quantum algorithms. And that will cause, issues that may slow, for instance, migration or influence the way in which the migration plays out, going forward. So this is kind of ongoing research, but it's sort of already progressed to the point of breaking fifth order masking on Kyber. The other one I would mention, this is, active attacks. You can call it like fault injection or some kind of active tampering attacks. So there was this other paper at Railroad Crypto. In fact, it was a large group. I was one of the co-authors on this, but this was, from my perspective, also one of the interesting things. There's an attack where we used Rowhammer to, during the key generation of Fredochem, could equivalently also be Kyber, for instance, flips just a small number of bits, 3 bits, 7 bits, something like this during the, the whole public key when it's generated. And it's sort of in a way that's at least hard to detect unless you're intentionally looking for this specific attack. The effect is that it sort of looks like a valid key, but it's, secretly a poison key. And the adversary that flips these bits in the public key later down the road can run a decryption failure attack, which involves sending a bunch of, sort of connections over TLS with the person who holds the secret key, and eventually allow you to sort of pull the secret key out of this kind of public interactions without really the attack being perceived by the honest users at all. So this is something where, there's nothing inherent about using Rowhammer in this particular attack. Really the lesson from this was that, particularly with the new lattice public keys, small numbers of bit flips in the representation of the public key can lead to very subtle attacks that are hard to kind of detect for honest users. So it's something that, in general, is being aware of, that something's potentially somewhat new. At least in the way it's done, that's kind of part of these new post-quantum algorithms, and that people are going to be actively trying to work to, sort of develop ways to resist these kinds of issues, or explore further attacks, of course. For instance, not using Rowhammer, but still, for instance, maybe manipulating some of the algebraic matter. So just to kind of wrap up, I wanted to mention, I'm actually going fast and hopefully got us back on time. But so just some final thoughts here, sort of research questions that I guess I would say academics are generally going to be working on, people engaged with IETF are going to be working on for commercial deployment on the near term, things that came up in discussion. So the first kind of observation is these post-quantum signatures are bigger than the key exchange's keys, and there's, for instance, proposals like KIM-TLS that allow you to avoid using signatures in protocols. So you might see some kind of alternative protocols discussed, for instance, in IETF at some point. Another issue is these X509 certificates might contain these KIM public keys, and so there's this question of proving non-interactively giving proof of possession of the KIM public keys is sort of an open issue, and there's sort of some work on that. But as X509 certificates kind of develop and you get these new fields for X509, quantum safe usage, there's sort of some technical issues that people are currently working on. There was this other question of, did NIST PQC, by virtue of standardizing in this space, sort of inhibit new research? And I guess the answer is no. It was actually a fantastic boost to the post-quantum cryptography field that NIST had this whole long process and so forth. But for instance, there's some techniques out there that could be considered useful. That are sort of, in some sense, technically a little stronger than what's been standardized, because of course these schemes were submitted back in 2016, and then 5, 6 something years have passed, et cetera. So there are actually kind of, I would say, technically stronger, ideas out there already, and they will probably still continue to be developed. It is possible at some point in the future, I don't know, for enough timeline here, 5, 10 years or something, that NIST could, for instance, consider going back and sort of updating their lattice cryptography standards once things progress far enough that there's a big enough win by going to different technologies. And then there's, I guess, another question that people are discussing is, well, what about advanced crypt, things like homomorphic encryption, identity-based encryption, attribute-based encryption. And there's some thought that, hey, now that post-quantum cryptography has sort of been standardized and it's available out there, people trust it in some sense more than maybe they did, 10 years ago. Can you move forward with these kind of advanced crypt solutions? And who will do so and in what manner? So not a comprehensive list of real-world research questions. In particular, one of my favorite recent papers from ePrint was this paper by this is Panos Kamnakis and Tancred Lapointe from AWS. It's on ePrint. It's the idea is there, 2023-266, and they actually identified just a list of, I think, about 20 to 25 important questions like, hey, if we want to drop in post-quantum crypto in this, in such and such protocol, we need to, increase the size of the message size by, say 400 bytes or something like that. Otherwise, we're going to introduce extra rounds, this kind of thing. Lots of very interesting practical issues there that they raised. And I think will have to be addressed soon. This will sort of, modify a lot of the protocols and structures that are sort of standardized for, say the public internet. So anyway, that is the talk. Happy to take questions, and glad we're back on our on our pace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does X509 today support composite certificates?
X509 is sort of developing. In fact, I was just at there was an X509 PQ day like a couple weeks ago, or maybe a week ago. I think I was at actually the roundtable for this. It's being developed, it's being worked on. Does it support it? Well, in some sense, yes, you can extend these things in natural ways to do composite or non-composite. And if you go to the hackathon, like the IETF held the hackathon, this was actually at Tokyo as well. It was like the first day of IETF was this IETF hackathon where they just sat down and programmed up from scratch, like basically a working X509 style, certificate kind of scheme, multiple ones of them, and then got them actually running, sending things back and forth and verifying on laptops. So yes, it does support it. It's not, I would say, official yet.
And then, can you explain how a non-composite certificate where in the OR mode actually provides any protection?
Right. Well, let me put it this way. It's written in one of these working drafts of the IETF, and you can look at some of these things and go, that's absurd, right? In some sense, the OR mode is intended to be sort of a way to, put in the standard a field where you can flip a bit at some point and say, now please use the post-quantum one. So that's what the OR is supposed to be intended for, is like when you finish the migration kind of thing. So.
Anyone else? All right.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Up next is Jeremy Rasmussen from Abacode. He's the CTO there. He's going to talk about post-quantum crisis in the ICT supply chain. Jeremy mentioned to me earlier that he did submit this for CMMC, so it'd be a little bit interesting view on how IT people are looking at this quantum mess, Pat, as well. Do you want to switch to your laptop?
My laptop, if you don't mind.
Okay. Let's cross our fingers.
Yep.
And then, do you need the remote, or let's just...
Nope.
Okay.
Anything.
All right, everyone, cross your fingers.
It's always one guy. Got to bring trouble.
Black patches.
Gonna have to try this.
Now you're tempting fate.
You went to soccer, it's a cool conversation.
Looks successful. All right. That's my 1-year-old granddaughter. She was holding a ball, but my son photoshopped it, so she's holding the bust of poor old Yorick. So we have a weird family, sorry. Let me just do this real quick. Yep. So I was tricked. I didn't know there was going to be actual cryptographers in the room, but hey. So yeah, this is a presentation in light of, I was thinking about how's this all going to affect like controlled unclassified information in commercial companies and people that have to implement these requirements. So yeah, this is going to be an order of magnitude less sophisticated than some of the previous presentations, but it's okay. I mean, I'm somewhat of a cryptographer myself. Actually, my background is, I did work on some devices that you might find in the National Cryptologic Museum, which makes me feel pretty old, but they're still actually being used. ANCYZ-10 and the DTD-2000 and Rascal, KIV-19, KOV-20 card, and all this. And I've known about commercial solutions for classified since the 90s, right? Because we had this ANCYZ Crazy 10 key fill device, and they said, let's shrink this down into the form factor of a type 2 PCMCA card. We'll call it a KOV-20, and then we'll put it in this commercial off-the-shelf HP Jornada PED, right? Personal electronic device. So we did all that, and then, NSAC group was like, can't put a trusted crypto engine in an untrusted off-the-shelf device, so forget that. We're gonna have to, lock it down. So now we're back to square one. But One of my other fun side jobs over the years, I've also been adjunct faculty at University of South Florida, teaching classes in cryptography, network security, ethical hacking. Actually, I started the student hacking club there. We made it to the finals of DEF CON Capture the Flag a few years back. So my other fun side job was actually newspaper reporter for about 20 years covering sports. So somebody mentioned Feynman, Richard Feynman. That's one of my heroes. If you've ever read the book, surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. This guy was not only an amazing, nanotechnologist and physicist, but he also played the bongos down on samba bands in Brazil, and he worked on cancer research and all this other stuff. So in some small way, I'm just trying to be cool like Richard Feynman and do, everything. But I remember I was covering spring training for the Yankees back in the day. And they would come down to Tampa. I'm from Tampa, Florida. And this is, I got to meet Roger Clemens and Mike Mussina and Dave. Any Yankees fans here? Any of those people? Okay, well, David Wells was this guy, and he was quite a character, and he wrote this tell-all book. So I'm in this reporter pool, and, I'd read, some people were not too happy about the book. And they're asking, and I asked a question, I'm like, David, is all this stuff true, or just write, just make it up to sell books? And one of the guys, one of the other reporters pulled me aside afterwards, and he's like, why did you ask him that? And I was like, well, can I ask a question? And basically there's 100, beat reporters who are all clamoring to get a scoop at all times, and I was just coming in, on the side, the new guy, and it was like, I didn't even have the right to ask a question. But hopefully I don't feel like that in this audience. Maybe I do. Don't get mad at me if I ask some questions. That's all I'm doing about this stuff. All right, so, I don't think we have to, we're probably going to skip over this really fast. This is, again, aimed at the CMMC Day folks, just to understand why are we concerned about some of this stuff? And I think you probably already also know how RSA works, et cetera, that, the resistance of that modulus to being factored, we're not going to go into that. I'm just going to skip right over that. But the reason this is a big deal to me is you read the news lately about this 3CX attack. This is like about a month or two ago. So they had, it was a supply chain attack where they were able to compromise a software update, very much like the SolarWinds thing that happened a few years back. And this was signed code that was going out to more than 10 million users of the software. So that was, a fake SSL certificate that they'd been able to do to sign the code. Now, imagine if you didn't have to hack the system, if you could just reverse engineer the certificate through quantum methods, and then now you can create your own certificate, right? That's, to me, from a commercial standpoint, that's the power of this attack. And if you went out there and looked on vulnerability search engines such as Shodan, you could find 250,000 exposed devices that were running that software. So like my company does, consulting and managed security and compliance programs for other companies. We immediately had to go and, hey, has anybody run the software? Let's try to get it out of the environment. But this is just, a glimpse into the future where nation states have this capability to, create fake certificates or inject themselves into the process where they're either, compromising authentication or confidentiality, integrity, whatever. We've talked to this guy a million times already. Shore, posited this algorithm that could efficiently factor, numbers or compute discrete log, which are the bases of our, public key cryptography today. Of course, you need a quantum computer to run on, and those aren't, those don't grow on trees. But Y2Q rather, is coming, and that's what we need to be worried about. So, from this information telecommunications supply chain, point of view, all ICT suppliers that are in the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, have to comply with the DFARS for safeguarding CUI. And they also have to comply with NIST Special Pub 800-171, which is the requirements for the controls for protecting CUI. Amongst those controls, I picked out a few. Remote access, VPN, wireless networks, and mobile devices are three of the areas where quantum cryptography is going to come into play, right? or post-quantum safe, I should say, cryptography is going to be an issue. Reason being, we've talked about this ad nauseum, but classical computers store everything as ones and zeros. Quantum computers use qubits, and the nice thing about qubits is that they can solve, problems with massive parallelism. So whereas a standard computer is on the order of a gigaflops or billions of floating point operations per second, a quantum computer, a 30-bit quantum computer would have, teraflops or trillions of floating point operations per second capability. Where are we today with those? Well, IBM's already coming out with a computer this year that will pass the 1,000 qubit mark. Now we'll get into this a little bit more later. They're not error-free qubits, and there has to be, gate depth measurement and things like that. But they're talking about 1,000 qubits this year. Flamingo is going to have 1,386, and then by 2025, Kookaburra is going to have over 4,000 qubits. What are the implications of this for algorithms? We've talked about this ad nauseum. Basically, for symmetric key algorithms, we're thinking basically half. Perhaps the post-quantum security level is roughly half. If it was AES 256, it's going to be about the strength of AES 128 theoretically. And if it's RSA 2048, it's going to be broken. So, as we said earlier, you have two choices here, two vectors. Either one, we can use quantum cryptographic methods, which means you need a quantum channel or a means for sending qubits, and that's expensive, difficult. You're going to need a lot of repeaters. The illustration comes to mind of Bruce Schneier from this classic book, I think 99, Secrets and Lies, where he wrote Applied Cryptography. He written a Blowfish, two-fish algorithm, and he thought, strong enough crypto algorithm, I can solve any problem in cybersecurity. But he realized every system has to be designed, implemented, and run by humans, and humans make mistakes. And so it's like having this fence around your house, and the fence posts are a mile tall, right? And those represent your crypto algorithm. Well, you're never going to get somebody to run into the fence post, right? They're going to go cut through the fence, dig under the fence, helicopter in over the fence, whatever. So it's the same type of thing. So really what we're looking at is post-quantum cryptographic methods, right? More conventional ciphers that are based on mathematical techniques and that we can operate on conventional hardware. So we've already mentioned a lot. Some of the possibilities: lattice-based crypto, hashes, error codes. Those are, like classic McLeish. That's based on some stuff that we've seen for a long time, right? With Hamming codes and Claude Shannon and some of that information theory. That's been around since the 40s, right? It's very old stuff, tried and tested. Of course, hashes have been around for a long time. Those are super effective as well, but as we've heard earlier, rather slow and hard to deal with. So lattice is kind of where we're going. I'm not going to go into the mathematics, obviously, but you've got these groups that exhibit symmetry in n directions. Lattices are also found in crystalline structures in nature. They're just very interesting to study geometrically and in group theory. Group theory is of course the basis of fundamental building block in Reindahl, which is the basis of AES, right? So basically have these lattices that represent coordinate vectors. Any point of the lattice can be reached by adding points E1, 2, and 3 in vector arithmetic. The shortest vector problem says, given a lattice, find the element whose length is the shortest. So bottom line is, we think that the complexity of these algorithms is on the order of NP hard, right? Which is difficult to solve in a finite amount of time. And this is a slide we've seen on every presentation so far. Like, where do we stand right now with NIST? They wanted to find some candidate algorithms, just like we did with Advanced Encryption Standard and some of these other contests, where put out the call for help. Let's have the community peer review these. Let's beat them up, and then announce the finalists that will be part of this post-quantum safe suite of algorithms. As I understand it, there's still time to get in under the wire, for that June 1st deadline. If anybody has some more candidate algorithms to submit, they're still taking submissions there. Some of the issue, of course, just like the last presenter, I have a XKCD cartoon, where, amazing watching those cryptographers work, exploring the universe of simplifity of numbers. If I only studied math, I could appreciate the beauty on this display. The cryptographer is like, oh no, this has two unknowns, it's gonna be hard. I wish there was a way to avoid doing all that work. Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can't really sidestep the mathematical work that has to be done, because we understood last year, within 6 months, there were two of those candidate algorithms that were broken through classical and not quantum computing methods. So, as Barbie says, math is hard. The first one was Rainbow. It actually made it to round 3 before being broken last year by an IBM postdoc, Ward Bullens, I think. It had relied on the hardness of the problem of solving a large system of multivariate quadratic equations over a finite field. So that one's gone. And then this one was a round 4 candidate we talked about earlier, Psych, super singular isogeny key encapsulation. And they thought they were using basically the same methods as elliptic curve, which has been fairly consistently secure over the last 20 years. But this went down the tubes when the paper called an efficient key recovery attack on SIDH described a technique that uses complex math and a single traditional PC to recover the encryption keys on Psych-protected transactions. This earned the researchers a $50,000 prize from Microsoft. This is interesting, really interesting quote from the co-inventor of Psych. He's like, you know what? A lot of deep mathematics, which has been well published in the mathematical literature, but it's not well understood by cryptographers. I lump myself into that category of those researchers who work in cryptography but probably don't understand as much math as we should. So, I'm not throwing stones. Believe me, I don't have a candidate algorithm in the game, but I thought this was a staggering quote from this guy. Around Christmas, now this is probably where I get controversial, because I did ask a question about this earlier, and this might be a garbage paper, but let's just talk about it for a minute. There's this guy, Bao Yan, and out of China, and 23 of his closest colleagues. I've never seen 24 names on a research paper before, but they had this paper factoring integers with sublinear resources on a supercomputing quantum processor. What a gift, right? I was reading Discover magazine. We're going to have, this is going to do everything. This is going to solve this 30-year-old cryptographic challenge. And they introduced the idea of a SQUIF, a sublinear resource quantum integer factorization. All right, so the way I see it in layman's terms is kind of a hybrid approach. The classical computing part for a portion of it, but then use quantum techniques for the most time-consuming or the longest pole in the tent kind of thing. I felt like SQUIF needed a logo or a mascot. So I came up with this one, but it's based on, so there's a cryptographer, Schnorr, not Shore, but Schnorr, out of Germany, who had this paper for factoring large integers. He, in his own words, on his website says it effectively destroys RSA. But Schnorr has a few errors in his paper, and he had to retract it and try to correct it. Here's the bottom line. In the classical realm, it takes a long time for Schnorr's algorithms to find enough vector pairs, which are called smooth relation SR pairs, to break RSA. Also, it only seems to work on 48-bit RSA and breaks down on larger sizes. And I think this is what you were talking about earlier. All this breaks down. Nobody kind of knows why. Well, NSA probably knows why, but they're not telling us. That's my guess. But the Chinese team were very eager to glom onto that error and then add in a little bit of quantum there for the win, right? So this is where the quantum optimizer, which they call the quantum approximate optimization algorithm, or QAOA, just QAOA. That's where that comes in. it basically takes the second part of, so the first part of the algorithm is apply Laszlo Babai's algorithm for solving graph isomorphism to obtain these optimal pairs. The second part is you have to solve these linear, system of linear equations, and that's where the thing slows down. So what the Chinese team did is they used the energy spectrum of the qubits to represent the potential shortest pairs of vectors, right, SR pairs. So thanks to this property of their approach, they're saying it isn't only faster in quantum computing, but it's also possible to scale past 48 bits, theoretically, they say. But because the amount of energy levels of the SR pairs is limited in the noisy physical qubits, we have to have some computers that have a certain degree of fidelity and added circuit depth to achieve good results. But the paper comes up light on details here, unfortunately. Here's kind of the cool stuff, I guess. Under Shor, we need perfect fault-tolerant qubits to run, and it needs more qubits and greater circuit depth. Under Squiff, needs only some good quality qubits, but not perfect ones. Some noise is allowed, and not as much circuit depth. So prior to this algorithm, as we said, it was posited that Shor's algorithm needed on the order of 4,000 stable and error-free qubits to crack RSA 2048, or else about 4 million noisy qubits, and a circuit depth of like 8 billion. Now, if we've been reading over and over, where NIST and the current zeitgeist of the community says we have about a decade or so to prepare and get everything in place. However, IBM, as we showed, is planning a 4,100 qubit computer to come out by 2025, and the Chinese paper says they only need 372 qubits to break RSA 2048, and they don't even have to be error-free, fault-tolerant qubits. They can be noisy qubits. I also read recently there's a German company, Kipu Quantum, that has claimed to factor 48-bit integer with 10 qubits in a purely quantum approach, and not even not even a hybrid, classical and quantum approach. So the issue, of course, as we said, we don't actually know the specs on the IBM quantum computer. We don't know what its fidelity is. They're not going to publish that. It's probably like on the order of 99.9%, but it has to be, you need like probably 4 nines of accuracy. And its circuit depth is probably, in the order of hundreds, but it needs to be in the order of thousands. So the final thing I'll say in this paper, it should be pointed out that the quantum speed up of the algorithm is unclear due to the ambiguous convergence of the QAOA. That's the kind of the key line of the whole thing of why people are kind of poo-pooing the paper. Other people are saying, does this open the door for breaking lattice-based crypto? We don't know. Member of Google's quantum computing team says, they fail to tell the number of expected circuit gates, and that's critical to the whole premise. Another fella I was reading on the Bruce Schneier blog was saying, this is one of the most actively misleading quantum computing papers I've seen in 25 years. So RSA broken? Not yet. But maybe the methods in the paper show a potential threat to lattice-based crypto before those methods are even finalized. I just thought this would be a helpful guide right here as you're talking about your cryptographers. Schnorr and Schneier. Yeah. Get your cryptographer straight. So let's meet the algorithms. We already talked about these guys pretty well already. Kyber, Dilithium, Falcon, Sphinx. The beautiful thing is lattice-based crypto systems are fast. Kyber is going to be used for key exchange. Dilithium is used for digital signature. And then there's, they did add that fourth one in there, the Sphinx Plus, I guess, because it's hash-based and not lattice. All the others are lattice-based. There's some companies out there that are already, joining the NIST Cyber Community of Excellence. You probably work with these guys, right? That's your buddies. that are trying to roll this stuff all out, right? The applied cryptography of this stuff. AWS, Microsoft, Samsung, VMware, some others, and some of the folks probably in this room. Here's my thought. Okay, if I'm a DoD contractor, if I'm supporting the DoD and I need to have CUI protection, and I need to be worried about quantum computing and what is that threat against us. I think we need to practice vigilance, keep an eye on state of the art. These research papers, are we really 10 years away, or is it more like 3 to 5 years? Don't know. And then come up with threat modeling. It's really, this is an eye-opener to me, just listening to some of these other talks today, of all the stuff that's going on, these working groups, these global working groups, these people that are working on the protocols and the standards and stuff. That's awesome. I'm really glad. I guess just awareness for the community would be my next step of let's what are we working on? Let's do instead of a post-mortem, let's do a pre-mortem. Think of what could go wrong, and then work backwards from there to ensure success. And what are we going to do to eliminate those threats or mitigate the threats? So, finally, when you're looking at these post-quantum cryptographic solutions for secure messaging, VPN, identity access management, all the other stuff that we have to do for protecting CUI in the DoD supply chain, let's start looking at, interoperability, backwards compatibility. I think, some of the other things that were obvious, side channel attacks and stuff like that, but also agility, right? Ability to be programmable. When I was working on the KIV-19A back in the day, turn of the century, turn of the millennium, it wasn't reprogrammable, right? And so the KIV-19M was the modernized version of that. We were able to reprogram that, and that's the key. You've got to be able to update your crypto algorithms and roll with the times. So the whole hybrid digital certificates thought, I just heard moments ago that there's a working group working on that at this very minute. So I guess from my point of view, these are the things we have to start doing: is planning, threat modeling, and be prepared and not to fail. So with that, that's what I would have talked to the CMMC Day folks about. Any questions from, for a layman?
From a CMMC perspective, in order to be certified, for lack of a better word, do you have to address quantum in your checklist? Or?
What it says is use approved cryptographic algorithms. So as these are draft right now and not approved, I guess you're still okay with the current version. But in the future, when they are approved, then yes, you'll have to apply those. Yes, sir.
So similar. Is there any reading that there might be guidance in CMMC that asks industry to do the same type of audits that we've asked the agencies to do?
That's a really interesting question. So you're saying from a point of auditing to make sure they're using post-quantum safe crypto?
Well, it's not even that the audit is what are you using today and what are your high risk assets. So they're doing that in the agencies now. They're supposed to deliver them, have delivered them, or shortly deliver them. Is there any inclination that they're going to push that requirement to industry through CMMC or through something else? And maybe that's a general question.
Might not be asking the right person for that, maybe next door, but but I would have to say, yeah, right, because the other, all the other controls we have a means of validating them, right? So there has to be a means of that testing as well. Right now, if you're just thinking check a box type of compliance, it's probably like, are you using the validated, FIPS 140-2, wherever, validated crypto, you're good. That's check the box. I don't think, and honestly, I don't think CMMC goes too much deeper than that, but I don't want to, raise any controversy on the other side. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for all of the entertaining graphics in your presentation. You certainly win on that, unless we have some more coming later this afternoon. I'll be handing over to Jim Thompson to do the moderation for the last couple of sessions, but right now we are on break for just over half an hour, so please be back at 3:45.